3, 2. Hi, Mark Sudduth reporting to you for HurricaneTrack.com and HurricaneLiveNet.com. The time is about 2:25 Eastern Time, 1:25 Central Time. We understand now that Katrina is a Category 4 hurricane.
True.
So get down to Waveland that way, maybe.
If we have to, but yeah, if the hurricane stays on track, at least pieces of this bridge may not be here.
Right.
This is what, 10 feet above the surface right now, and we're expecting 28-foot surge up in here.
Not good.
Not good.
Interesting. I think I've been coming to the Mississippi coast since probably the year 2000, when I was on my way to the National Hurricane Conference in New Orleans that year. But as a child, I grew up hearing the stories of legendary Hurricane Camille, and these stories were deeply fascinating, if not rattling, to my young brain. You know, hearing about these harrowing tales of what happened in Mississippi that fateful night back in 1969.
So like Mark, I have a deep fascination for tropical weather, specifically hurricanes. Living in Mississippi, it's kind of hard to top the benchmark of Camille. I even named my dog Camille. So that shows you that fascination I have that's rooted from my childhood.
Camille in '69, you know, back then technology wasn't near what it is today, although it was pretty good even for Camille. Even if you go back and look at the stats and the fuzzy satellite stuff we had, you still get a good point. And we had about 24, maybe 36-hour notice on Camille, if that long. And again, I was just a kid, so I was just thinking it was cool, but my parents, I'm sure, were thinking otherwise.
Then in 2002, I was along the Mississippi coast with my good friend Jesse Bass, documenting Tropical Storm Isidore down along the Gulfport waterfront there at the Erie Pier. Probably did a few things that we shouldn't have done back then. If you wanted to get that shot, that really interesting close-up shot of the action, you had to do it with a handheld camera. Now, of course, we don't have to do that because we have these unmanned cameras that really take the place of that kind of dangerous work back then.
Oh, let's wait for this to pass.
And then, of course, there was Katrina in 2005. I found myself in Mississippi once again, this time with Mike Watkins, he and I working that mission together, and it's something that we will never forget. And the list goes on and on. In 2012, I was down there with Carrie for Hurricane Isaac. By 2017, the hurricanes were coming back again for the area, and I was there for Hurricane Nate. Here we are in 2020, and when the season's third named storm came calling, well, it was time to head back down to the Magnolia State once again.
So it's early June. Mark and I have been talking about the pattern, the hurricane season, all the potential, and how the Gulf might be the target area this year. And right on schedule. It's early June. We have a tropical storm forming in the Gulf of Mexico. And while you don't see the winds that you would see, you know, even a Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 hurricane, this was a large circulation. And when you have these large circulations and you get this constant barrage and this constant southerly and southeasterly flow, you get good storm surge events here in Mississippi.
Even though the center of what turned out to be Cristobal was forecast to make landfall in Louisiana, the larger than normal wind field meant that the Mississippi coast was likely going to see a pretty sizable storm surge. So I packed up a bunch of gear, got a nice rental truck for it there in early June, and I made my way down to the Mississippi coast once again, this time meeting up with Greg Nordstrom, who happens to live right there in Gulfport. Hey, good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and I just got into Alabama. Yay me. The latest on Cristobal. Winds are coming up, and it's expected to strengthen modestly, and it's going to bring some impacts. The storm surge is the big key here.
So Mark's on his way. He's going to pick me up. We're going to head towards Mandeville, Louisiana. And you know, as they say, the past can predict the future. And Mark was there during Hurricane Barry, and he experienced some pretty good storm surge with Barry. So we figured with the southerly flow, this is going to be a good spot.
We got Cristobal coming. What do you think we're going to get?
I think at very least a solid, strong tropical storm, probably in that 60, 70 mile an hour range. It'll be a little elliptical and a little, you know, weighted to the right.
We'll stack 2 of them so we can get as high as we can. This is where I was for Barry in 2019. I was late though. I didn't get down here until after it flooded. I walked down Lakeshore, came out and tried to get over to the lakefront here, but the water was up past my hips. So we're gonna go ahead and put a camera here and be ready for Cristobal or Cristobal or whatever you call it. So these early season storms are usually what we call east weighted, meaning that most of the nasty weather is going to be found on the eastern side of the circulation. And that is generally what the global models were indicating would happen with Cristobal.
Well, you know, that southeast flow is what we have, and all that south, you know, it always ends up down there and on that end of town, in that corner right there where Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana come together.
And as such, it definitely looked like a sizable surge was going to make its way into Mississippi, so we had to make sure we were absolutely ready for that. So the first order of business for Greg and myself was to get a full weather station, this anemometer system, and a live camera set up down at the Gulfport Municipal Marina. I have been to this spot many, many times. It's definitely my favorite location along the Mississippi coastline.
But then the direction of Cristobal was obviously in question because of where it was and how far off land, how far offshore it was at that particular time. So we're getting down to the wire here on our boaters. Do we make them go? Do we let them stay? Do we make them go? Do we let them stay?
Yeah, so the idea is that it'll just clamp right onto this thing, hopefully. So there's a bit of an irony here because this exact location is where Mike Watkins and I set up the very first unmanned camera system back on August 28th into the early morning hours of August 29th in 2005 in anticipation of the arrival of catastrophic Hurricane Katrina. I mean, it was literally right here at this very location in the small craft harbor. Unfortunately, back then, that massive storm surge wiped everything out. We lost all of our camera boxes and we never had any video to show for it. But this, in fact, was the spot where it all began almost 15 years ago.
We're heading west on I-10. We're going to pass by just to the north of Bay St. Louis near Diamond Head, and then we're going to take the road south to the bay and then down towards Waveland where it was ground zero in Katrina. Well, when you go from Bay St. Louis towards the Silver Slipper, which is the casino there, you kind of go down through Bay St. Louis and come down through an area called Waveland. That was ground zero in Katrina. And I knew that, and I knew that while we're not going to get 25, 30 feet of surge, even 6, 7, 8 feet of surge is going to look pretty dramatic in this area.
All these vehicles you see here on the side of 603 near Waveland, Mississippi, they're parked there to avoid the storm surge. Ironically, that drainage ditch was filled with destroyed cars after Hurricane Katrina. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. They were there for actually weeks after Katrina back in '05. This is Bay St. Louis, and it is busy. Wow, look at all the people. Holy mackerel.
Look at that. It's packed, so you keep going straight.
So yeah, we felt like this area was definitely going to see a significant storm surge from Cristobal. The National Hurricane Center was forecasting 3 to 5 feet. We felt like it could be a little bit higher than that. So we got to work very quickly here, set up a live cam and a GoPro system to back it all up. The next camera location was over in Pass Christian, right down at the water's edge there, real close to things. Wanted to get a different perspective from the marina looking back towards the roadway, so we got that set up and running. All the while we're doing this, it turns out Cristobal was getting better organized, and a lot of that bad weather was heading our way.
It'll deteriorate quickly tomorrow. We should see a good 6 to 12 hours of 60 mile an hour plus gusts for sure. Probably 3 to 5 feet of surge.
By June 7th, Cristobal had become stronger. Winds were about 50 miles per hour, but the key here was twofold. It was better organized overall, and the wind field was pretty expansive, and that constant onshore flow really piling up the water there in the Mississippi Sound, coupled with the fact that Cristobal was moving fairly slowly, meant that we were going to see a significant storm surge unfold there along the coast, anywhere from Waveland all the way over to the Biloxi area. .2:30 here in Gulfport, Mississippi. What is it, June 7th? I think
So.
Yeah. Already starting to run together, the days, and the season's just getting started. We had done well so far in setting up all of this equipment from Mandeville, Louisiana, over to Waveland, Pass Christian, Gulfport, and even as far east as Biloxi, and also one over on I-10 near Delisle, right on the interstate there. But now it was time for Greg and myself to get out in the action and see what the impacts were in person.
It's sitting right off the shore. It's actually slowed down. I think the friction slowed it down a little bit. I think it's going to stair step west,
5
north,
miles
west,
per
north.
hour, dude. Come on.
No, that's just going to prolong
Yeah.
this, and the surge is already coming over the road on 90 in many areas along the Mississippi coast, and we're just getting started. And it really just goes to show you how vulnerable this area truly is to storm surge.
Look, it's already got debris sticking out of people's windshields or side windows. What the heck is
I
that?
don't even know what that is. That is weird.
It's crazy being down here in Gulfport, Mississippi. This is where it all began 16 years ago with the unmanned cameras. Right there, Greg, where that ford is where the camera was. Right there. And that was the view it had, off to the left over there. Every time I come back to the Mississippi coast, I don't care if it's a tropical storm or a hurricane that requires my attention there, I always think of the fact that this is the location. This is it. This is where the unmanned camera project really took off back in 2005. And I definitely think there's a little bit of that ghost of Katrina haunting us all. A little bit more than you expected from a, kind of a weird looking storm, right? I mean, it's
Especially compared to a few hours ago when it didn't look like much, but it's really picked up in the last hour. Storm surge is rushing across Highway 90. We're here in Long Beach. I would say it's at least a couple feet deep in the intersection where the marina is here in Long Beach, kind of close to the back behind us, the Harbor View restaurant. This area will continue to see water piling up, and it just really shows you how vulnerable this spot really is to storm surge.
Storm surge was the big story with Cristobal. It was impacting everywhere from Waveland over to Pass Christian, Gulfport, Biloxi, even Pascagoula. And it all was because of that wind field. I keep emphasizing that. This very large wind field, the slow motion of the storm itself towards the coastline. We can see the visible satellite. Look at the large circulation around Cristobal. All that wind and energy piling up the water anywhere from the Florida Panhandle over to Mississippi. And it just goes to show you a lot can happen even with a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm.
If it would have stayed over down in the Bay of Campeche there, and it would have just built up, I think we'd be looking at a major hurricane, and probably the strongest hurricane in June since Audrey in 1957. We're heading from Long Beach to Pass Christian here on Highway 90 West. For a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm, this is fairly impressive.
Meanwhile, over in Mandeville, our camera system there was showing basically nothing. And I thought, surely with this persistent onshore flow coming out of the southeast across Lake Pontchartrain, that we would definitely get some storm surge there, but so far, nothing yet. But over in Gulfport, Waveland, Biloxi, and all that area, it was definitely a different story. As the moisture comes in off the Gulf still, you get these narrow feeder bands that are set up. You probably get a couple tornadoes and water spouts that everybody's freaking over, but not big wide ones like today. So we've made it through the worst.
It's like, we've been dealing with it since 12 o'clock.
Right. As the late afternoon turned into early evening there in Mississippi, things finally started to calm down and the Gulf was subsiding. But over in Louisiana, in Mandeville, we looked at our camera system and we were quite surprised. The large circulation of Cristobal finally did push Lake Pontchartrain into Mandeville. The water came up several feet and it stayed elevated for several days actually. And I wasn't really able to get back there and pick up the camera. I just kind of had to wait for it. And I had to get on back home, so a nice gentleman from the fire department, actually over in Walker, Louisiana, ended up picking that cam up for us and sending it back to me. The day after Cristobal moved inland, Greg and I went down to Waveland and took a survey of everything, just driving along the beach road there. It was very easy to see these high water marks from the rack line, as it's called, all of this debris that gets pushed up. And it was pretty high in some places, relatively speaking, several feet, and there was a lot of cleanup that had to be done. All in all, our equipment worked perfect. It was a great test, and we thought, you know, with 2020 being what it is, I bet this is not going to be the last time that we are in Mississippi or the Gulf Coast, not by a long shot. So Greg, now that we're wrapping up the Cristobal mission, this is a sign of things to come, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and living here, I'm kind of worried even for here. That's almost like Cindy in 2005 before Katrina, but fingers crossed. But yeah, this is going to be a massive year. We'll have several hurricanes in the Gulf and all over the U.S. from Florida up towards your neck of the woods and then back towards Texas. So I wouldn't be shocked if we had over 20 names or 20 storms this year.